Lectureship, and if you're young, let me turn this on. I did not do that. There we go. It can be a lot. It can be a lot. There's a lot going through your head, and you did a fine job. And I appreciate this opportunity tonight because, as you can see, that first word up there, awestruck. I hope that at least once in the lesson tonight, you have a moment where you start to connect some things and you get that feeling of being awe-stricken, relative to God. And I have a way that I like to try to do that. And I hope that it has that effect. I'm just going to tell you up front what we're going to do. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to establish for you that the Bible teaches us that God is, in fact, all-powerful. Okay? So some of the preachers out there are like, that's going to be easy, right? And I could do that too. And there's no doubt you could. But we want to establish that. The next thing I want to do is I want to delineate God's omnipotence, because I know this is going to be weird to say, but yes, God can accomplish anything, but that doesn't mean he can do every conceivable thing. All right? And some of you already want to push back on me. And if you still want to push back on me afterwards, that's fine, but I'm going to give you some things. Maybe you don't like the word cannot, so maybe I should use the word will not. All right? But sometimes cannot and will not, it's a very fine line, okay? So we need to do that. Then what I want to do, and which we're going to spend most of our time doing, is I want us to demonstrate God's omnipotence. I want us to look at some evidence of God's omnipotence. That's where the rubber's going to meet the road, especially if we're trying to be awe-stricken when we consider God's power and immeasurable might. All right? And then we're going to follow that up with just, okay, we've done our work. We understand what the Bible teaches relative to this. We've looked at some demonstrations of his power, so how should you and I respond to a God like that, right? And that's a good place to land this. So that's what we're going to do. I think you are aware there's a Hebrew word or Hebrew phrase in the Old Testament, El Shaddai. I want to say maybe Jim Laws mentioned it last night. It's translated God Almighty. Or in some translations, it's the all-powerful God. It is all over the Old Testament. El Shaddai. You get to the New Testament, and you will find it outside of the book of Revelation, but there is a concentration in the book of Revelation of a Greek word, pantocrator. And it is translated from the Greek into English as the Almighty, right? It's all over the book of Revelation. You have the Latin Vulgate. Some of you have heard of Jerome's Latin Vulgate. Of course, the Roman Catholic Church went Latin for a long time, still do, okay? In the Latin Vulgate, when they came to the word pantocrator in Greek and they translated it into Latin, it came out as omnipotentum. And everybody in here knows what I'm talking about, pretty much, right? When you hear that, you're like, yeah, we've been throwing that word omnipotent around a long time. What does that mean? It means all-powerful. It means almighty. That's what we're saying about him. Now, besides ascribing a title to God that shows us or demonstrates that he is all-powerful, we also have the Bible affirming God's unmatched might in a variety of ways. So, for instance, Job 42:2, after being thoroughly humbled by God, Job says, I know that you can do all things and that no purpose of yours can be thwarted. After passing through the parted Red Sea, Moses and the Israelites saying the following words to the Lord: "Who is like you, O Lord, among the gods? Who is like you, majestic in holiness, awesome in glorious deeds, doing wonders?" Faced with foes, King Jehoshaphat prays in the temple, "O Lord, you rule over all the kingdoms of the nations. In your hand are power and might, so that none is able to withstand you." An unknown psalmist writes, "Mightier than the thunders of many waters, mightier than the waves of the sea. The Lord on high is mighty." Psalm 93, verse 4. And then on the night of his betrayal, Jesus prefaces his petition to the Father, you remember this, with these words: "Abba, Father, all things are possible for you." Now, those words were prayed in a rather interesting context. You know what it is, don't you? Garden of Gethsemane. And what is Jesus hoping, wanting to happen? The passing of the cup. And he prefaces that prayer by what? Acknowledging that his Father is all powerful, that he can do anything. So Scripture affirms that there's nothing too hard for the Lord. Scripture says that he can accomplish anything. So that's what's going to make this next part kind of awkward, okay? Here's one thing. God cannot do anything that is morally objectionable. Amen? God cannot lie. God cannot deny himself. Something we might add into the mix here: God can't give up an attribute. You ever thought about that? You can imagine God going, "Well, I kind of want to wad mercy up today and throw it in the trash can." God can't do that. You take something away from him. You take one of his attributes away from him, and what happens to him? Well, he ceases to be God. He can't do that. God can't sin. God can't be tempted to evil. And you know I'm not making that up, because that's what James said in James 1 and verse 13. He can't even be tempted to evil, much less sin. I mean, it's not going to happen. God is not going to violate his character. He will never use his power in some way that will violate who he is at his core. It's not going to happen, okay? He's not going to transgress his holiness by the use of his omnipotence. Here's another thing. This one's kind of a fun one, but this is where you get some pushback. I would argue that God cannot do anything that is logically impossible. Because if you don't go here, things get weird really quick, right? So here's what I'm willing to affirm. God cannot create a squared circle, because that's ridiculous, okay? It's dumb. God cannot create a married bachelor. God cannot create a rock that he cannot move. God cannot, create an object that is two colors at the same time. Now, this is fun to do with teenagers. Like, well, couldn't he? Couldn't he change the color so fast, right, that they could be both white and black at the same time? God cannot, this is going to be interesting, right? God cannot change the past. We'll talk about that some other day. And I would also say that God is not able to create a being who is free to love, but is not free to withhold love. That's got immense implications, because this stuff comes up in a lot of discussions. But that's like, we talk about love. It's like the Stepford wives, right? These wives are like robots, and they're able to spit money out their mouth, and they're waiting on their husband's hand and foot. And then at some point, the character in the movie says, "Okay, but can she love you?" Well, no. Well, we want love to be free. But freedom is going to imply something, right? It just is. And if you want more on that, Dr. Lapp had a great lecture earlier today. Here's a third thing, and some of you preachers are going to know what happened here. I know that's a big, weird word that gets all marbled in your mouth, teleologically undesirable. But I had to keep my LYs. Do y'all see this? Y'all see I got the LEs and the LYs going on? I had to keep this. That's what happened. But here's what I mean by it, okay? Here's what I mean by it. And see if y'all are with me on this. God will not exercise his power in ways that is going to undermine his goals or his purposes for creation, right? And this does come up in discussions about the problem of evil, the problem of suffering. I mean, despite what atheists contend, we do not have to reject either God's all-powerful nature or God's all-loving nature in the face of evil and suffering. What we would have to contend is that in view of God's purposes for creation, we must contend that God has justifiable, defensible reasons for not immediately eradicating all evil and suffering from the face of the earth. And that's what we are, prepared to do, if need be. So, now we're ready. But before we provide some examples of God's, and you guys, you're not going to be able to read this, I know, because I can't even read it, all right? I'm breaking all the rules of how you do PowerPoint here. I just see your colors up there. The stuff that is in orange up here are the attributes of God that can kind of we can to some degree imitate. The stuff that is in blue are attributes of God that are incommunicable. These are things that God has to himself alone. And what I want you to understand is that God is more than raw power. Now let that sink in a little bit. In other words, God's omnipotence is inextricably tied to his other attributes. Everything he does, the exercise of his incredible, unbelievable power, right? It is going to be in harmony with his love and his mercy and his justice and his omniscience. I mean, what if God was just brute force? He had power, but he doesn't know how to channel his power, right? That would be a scary proposition. So when we look at these examples, please know that while these examples that we're going to look at are going to demonstrate for us God's omnipotence, also know at the same time, it's also going to demonstrate God's omniscience. It's going to demonstrate God's ingenuity, God's creativity, God's wisdom, okay? And so as we look at these things, right, keep that in mind. You'll notice here, and I'm indebted to Dr. Leip and Dr. Gilmore for this years ago, the so-called 2 books of divine revelation. What I want you to see is that what we're about to focus on is what is to your left, okay? General revelation. The unwritten evidence is what we're going to take a look at. And we're going to, it's going to feel like you're in an astronomy class or a science class or a biology class. But look at those 2 verses, 2 passages to your left. Psalm 19, 1 through 3, the heavens declare the glory of God. Do you believe that? I do. I do believe that in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. So when I look at the heavens and the earth, I'm learning some stuff about God. I'm not learning everything about God, but I'm learning some stuff about God, like his power and his wisdom. The skies proclaim the works of his hands. Day after day they pour forth speech. Night after night they display knowledge. There is no speech or language where their voice is not heard. Their voice goes out into all the earth, their words to the ends of the world. Even though these things are not voicing anything, Their very presence tells us all kinds of things, right? We'll consider also Romans 1:19 and 20. For what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. For his invisible power and divine nature have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world and the things that have been made, so they are without excuse. So here's what we're going to do. With these passages in mind, we are going to proceed trusting that the reality of creation, whatever has been created, does in fact reveal the glory, the majesty, the wisdom, the ingenuity, and the incomparable power of the Lord of heaven and earth. So here we go. We're going to do this in three ways. We're going to look up, we're going to look around, and we're going to look down, okay? We're going to look through the telescope, we're going to look through the binoculars. If you don't like binoculars, glasses, okay? And then we're also going to have microscope. That right there is one you probably saw in biology class, when you were in high school. The stuff I want to look at is stuff through an electron microscope, where things are getting magnified like 300, 400, 1,500 times. Guys, there is a universe out there, right? Like the big universe. What's ridiculous is that there's like tiny universes all at our feet, right? And we need to see these things. We need to be reminded of these things. I'm not going to say that what I'm about to tell you is not something you've never seen before. But it's possible this is not something you've thought about recently, right? And we need to see this, and we need to feel this. We do need to, in fact, stand in awe of God. Sometimes we just don't. But we need to. Here we go. Now I know if you look up at the telescope, you can't see the earth, right? Because you're on earth. But it's really important for us to think about this planet that we're on right now. Yes, by the way, the earth is round. Okay? And that's all I'm going to say about that. It's an interesting color. It's blue. And that blue is water. And this is our planet. This very moment, we are sitting on this planet that God, in all of his power, wisdom, and ingenuity, created, and then he set in space. And we are here on this planet, and we are hurling through space, traveling a total of 93,205,679 miles every single year. That's well over 255,000 miles a day. So you could take a nap, and you would still have had a very productive day, right? And that's right. We're traveling 255,000 miles. And we're doing all of that while spinning at a rate of 1,000 miles an hour at the equator. How many of you feel like you're traveling 255,000 miles a day? And how many of you feel like you're spinning at 1,000 miles an hour? The reason you don't feel it is because the planet we're sitting on is really, really big. Right? By the way, if the earth ever stopped spinning, if God ever took a nap, we'll have 500 mile per hour hurricane winds. So thank God that we spin like we do. What about the moon, right? Look up. This is called the lesser light in Genesis. The moon does some amazing things. If we didn't know better, we'd think it was just up there for decoration. Maybe give us a little light at night when it's full. Like it's just, like a pin on the lapel of the night sky. But in point of fact, this moon that is 240,000 miles away from us has a lot to do with our tides. And if that moon were close to the earth by just 1/5, the tides would be so enormous that twice a day they would reach 35 to 50 feet high over most of the earth's surface. So I don't know when the last time you thanked God for the moon and it's precise distance from us, but that's not a bad thing to thank God for. And while you're at it, thank God for Jupiter. And you're like, that's weird. I've never thought about thanking God for Jupiter. But if Jupiter were not in its current orbit, the Earth would be bombarded with space material. Well, why is that? Well, because Jupiter is a massive planet. And its gravitational field acts as like a cosmic vacuum cleaner. It's just sucking up all that space material into its orbit, which means what? That space material doesn't make it here. So the next time you pray to God and you thank God for something, it is perfectly okay to thank God for Jupiter. Just saying. Here's another thing. The sun gets me, y'all. The sun, as God's creation, is something else. Now, it's our closest star. But this is what always gets me. When I learned that the sun was 93 million miles away from the earth, my jaw dropped. Because number one, I'm like, that sun did a pretty good job of burning my skin this past summer. And you're telling me that the sun that burned my skin this past summer is 93 million miles away. I got two questions. Number one, how big is the sun that I can even see it in the sky when it's 93 million miles away? You ever thought about that? I mean, that's so ridiculous. If we would just think about this once a day, we would be like, God, you're something else, right? The other question I've got is how hot is that sun, right? If you're going to be 93 million miles away from me, I want to know how big you are, and I want to know how hot you are. Well, I've got some answers from NASA, all right? The temperature at the center of the sun is estimated to be 27 million degrees Fahrenheit. That's goofy. I don't even know what to do with that number. But that sounds really, really hot to me. Sounds like I'm not getting anywhere near that, right? And also, here's something else. The diameter of the sun is 864,938 miles. And it would take 1.3 million Earths to fill up the volume of the sun. So that means if you put the sun and the earth next to each other, a single earth is going to be hard to spot, right? That is just crazy. And how big you got to be, how powerful do you have to be to create something like that? But that's not the only star, okay? So this, and you're like, how do I say that? You're going to have fun with this. You pronounce that Beetlejuice, okay? And they tell us that this star is 640 light years away. And I know that doesn't make any sense. Like, okay, what is a light year, pray tell? I haven't been watching Star Trek here lately. What is a light year? Well, that is how far light travels in 1 year. Do you guys want to know how far light travels in 1 year? 5.88 trillion miles. And what they're saying is that star that you're seeing right there, kind of like in the middle of the screen, they're telling me that's 640 light years away. So that's 640 times 5.88 trillion. That's how far that is away from us. And they tell us that it is so big that it would take 262 trillion Earths to fill up that star. And there's like another one. There's another star that's bigger than that one. And they tell us that thing's 3,000 light years away. They call it Mu Caffei. And they say that it would take 2.7 quadrillion Earths to fill up Mu Caffei. And then I was like, what is quadrillion? That doesn't make any sense to me. Well, then I got some help. I said, okay, if you want to put this into something you can put, wrap your brain around, try this. 1 million seconds equals 12 days. 1 billion seconds is about 32 years. 1 trillion seconds is over 31,700 years. And 1 quadrillion seconds, just 1 quadrillion seconds, equals 31,709,792 years. So if anybody ever asks you, hey, is quadrillion a big number? Yeah, it's really, really, really big. How big you gotta be? How powerful do you have to be? How incredible do you have to be to create something like that? And then I get out here in this Milky Way. This right here is an actual photograph, probably been doctored some, But they tell me that this was by NASA's Cosmic Background Explorer, and they tell me that in our galaxy there's an estimated 100 billion stars. And they tell me this too, that the average distance, you guys, how many of you like looking up at the night sky? I love it. I used to do a lot more of it. I need to do more of it. I used to go out on a trampoline, I don't know how many times as a kid, and I would just lie on a trampoline and just look around. And you ever noticed how it looks, you ever paid attention to the Little Dipper? You got the little 5 points on there. And you're like, oh, I see the Little Dipper. Sometimes you see hey, son, look, it's the Little Dipper. And it looks like those stars are kind of close to each other, right? I mean, from this distance, it looks like they're close to each other. Okay, what I'm about to tell you is going to blow your mind. The average distance between two stars, average distance between two stars in our Milky Way galaxy, the average distance is 5 light years, i.e., 30 trillion miles. And you're like, everything this preacher's saying has got to be false. This sounds ridiculous. Check me. Check me. Find all your sources. Check me on this. The average, so when you look up at the night sky, you're like, those two stars look like they're close to each other. They are not. They're 30 trillion miles apart. God is awesome. Man, I got more. I gotta go. Okay, this looks like some really bad wallpaper that got put on your, when you were a kid. Your mom's like, do you like your new wallpaper? I'm like, yeah. Looks kind of gross. But I want you to, this is one of probably several images. Images. I don't think this is the composite image. But you need to know that, you guys ever see a paper clip? What do you like to do with a paper clip? I end up unfolding it. Y'all unfold paper clips? You see them, they're laying next to you, like, I'm going to pull that apart. So, when you take that arm and you pull it up like this, and it's got the end on it, okay? What they did was they shot a beam into space that was smaller than the end, they're just looking at a very tiny portion of the night sky when they sent that beam out. Get a series of images. It's called the Hubble Ultra Deep Field. To get a series of images from September 4, 2003 to January 16, 2004. And the little beam was smaller than the tip of the paper clip. So it's just, this right here is getting way out there, but it's just a tiny, tiny portion of the sky. And what they said is, all those swirly things and flat things and stuff that we're looking at in these pictures are galaxies. Like, I just told you about the Milky Way galaxy. That's where we're at. That's pretty amazing. But they're telling me that in the composite picture they got from the Hubble Ultra Deep Field, there were 10,000 galaxies in that one little slice of the night sky. The heavens are something else. Isaiah 40, 25 and 26, to whom will you compare me, God asks. Or who is my equal, says the Holy One. We all know the answer to that. There is no equal. Then God says, lift up your eyes and look to the heavens. Who created all these? He who brings out the starry host one by one and calls forth each of them by name. Because of his great power and mighty strength, not one of them is missing. That right there is like a mic drop, right, from Isaiah. John Glenn was 77 years old when he got to fly with the Space Shuttle Discovery. And he looked out his window of that shuttle at space, and this is what he said. To look out at this kind of creation and not believe in God is, to me, impossible. And I would say, totally agree with you. It is true, I think. You can't look at that and go, there is no God. But we need to go further. You can't look out at the universe and not believe that God is all-powerful and God is all-wise. That to say otherwise is equally impossible. We got to look around very quickly. You're looking around the earth and you're like, whoa, we got a lot of water. You ever notice how much water we got? How many? All right, show of hands. How many's been on a cruise? How many of you been on a cruise before? Have you ever just like, how many of you have just kind of, let's just be honest, after a while it's kind of boring out there. You're just looking and you're like, well, more water. Right? Speaking of, more water, right? There's a lot of water. In fact, 70%, you probably learned this fact, 70% of the Earth's surface is covered by water. And then we learned some other stuff that's just crazy. What gets me is that at present, now this might have clicked up 1 or 2%, so I'm going to say 5 to 10%. We have only searched 5 to 10% of the world's oceans. Y'all understand what I'm just saying right there? There is so much that we have yet to see, discover, look at, go hunting. I mean, and I hope that doesn't get some of you out there like, there's got to be some treasure out there still, and then we lose you for a long time, But I'm just saying, it's so vast. So vast. And then they tell me that, scientists have done their math and they're like, okay, if you're wondering, the Earth's oceans contain approximately 332,519,000 cubic miles of water. So you're like, well, I'm sorry, that doesn't help me any. Okay, 1 cubic mile would be like, a mile's like 14 football fields. So think about 14 football fields wide, 14 football fields high, 14 football fields deep. Get you a cube of the 14 football fields. Times that by 332,519,000, and there's your ocean water. That's a lot. Isaiah 40, verse 12. Who has measured the oceans in the palm of his hand? We all know the answer that Isaiah is expecting us to give. We got to move. You ever seen lightning before? I think somebody mentioned lightning last night. It's amazing. It's kind of alarming. Lightning is a gigantic burst of electricity that zaps across the sky with a brilliant flash of light. It creates, of course, this booming crack called thunder. Lightning is caused by water and ice moving around inside of a cloud, which creates an electric charge. And when that charge gets strong enough, it bursts out as a bolt of lightning. Did you know that a spark of lightning can stretch for miles? The longest distance a bolt has traveled that we know of is 200 miles. It also streaks through the air at a temperature of 50,000 degrees Fahrenheit. And every second, more than 100 lightning bolts strike somewhere on the earth. And I just want to tell you, as powerful as a lightning bolt is, as powerful as Thor thinks he is, he is nothing compared to the Lord. Does that look weird? A shark coming in at me, you know? When you think of a shark, you probably think of teeth, right? By the way, I put this up here for the kids that came here tonight on a Friday night. Aren't you glad they're here, right? Could have been anywhere else. Here, probably with their parents. I hope they're glad they came, even though this could give them nightmares tonight. But there are more than 400 species of sharks in the world. And here's the thing. Sharks' teeth are arranged in rows in their mouths, one behind the other. Sharks can have, some of them only have 5 rows of teeth. But the bull shark's got 50 rows of teeth. And what's so cool is that these rows of teeth can kind of act like a conveyor belt. So, bull shark's feeding on some prey. One of his teeth gets popped out. Not a problem. There's a row behind that'll come up and replace the one that he just lost. That is crazy. And sharks, I mean, they're kind of scary. Let's be honest about it. But they are amazing creatures. The bumblebee, they work really hard. What if I told you that every single second, please hear what just came out of my mouth, every single second, a bee flaps its little wings 200 times. I can't get my mind. I didn't believe that. I was like, are you kidding me? What does this source say? The same thing, right? You're telling me that a bee in 1 second, that's where that buzzing sound comes from, is flapping those wings up and down so fast. I mean, like lightning fast. That it goes up and down 200 times in 1 second. I just can't get it. And then there's honey, and I love honey. Let's look at microscope. Electron microscope. If you're dreaming of a white Christmas this year, here's what you're dreaming of. This is at 400 times magnification. Snowflakes. But that still looks kind of messy. So I got 3 for you, one after the other, all singled out, and you tell me if this isn't beautiful. That's awesome, right? That's also really cool and also very different. Here's one more. That's incredible. I wish we could sit here all night. Look at that one. Check that one out, right? This is called the sea peanut. I like the sea peanut. I do think that Nutter Butter needs to be paying royalties to these people, right? This is the sea peanut at 500 times magnification, right? Actually, no, it is a phytoplankton. This is 11,000 times magnification. This looks like a bunch of dog toys, all right? It's not. That right there, friends, is pollen. And we hate pollen, right? But I'm amazed by the symmetry, even at that level. This, we looked at the bumblebee earlier. This right here is the bumblebee's antenna at 700 times magnification. That's incredible. No, this is not from the movie Tremors, right? But this is a hydrothermal worm at 525 times magnification. They live in the ocean, and you'll be glad to know they are extremely small. They are smaller than a millimeter. So you ought not fear them unless you are smaller than they are, right? Have y'all ever seen these? These are called the tardigrades, but more colloquially, they're called the water bear. They are like an extremophile, right? What does that mean? That means that they can handle temperatures just above absolute zero. They will survive well above the boiling point of water. They can survive pressures greater than any found in the deepest ocean trenches. They have actually lived through the vacuum of outer space. Somebody's like, throw the water bear into outer space. Bring him back in. He should be dead. He's not dead. Wow. Right? It's incredible. They can also deal with solar radiation, gamma radiation, ionic radiation. They could go without food or water for nearly 10 years. And then you can bring them back to life. That's the water bear. God created the water bear. Very small. Very, very small. They're usually only about 1 millimeter long. One more DNA, and then we get to the end. We'll land, okay? We're going to land. This is something that David didn't know when he said, I am fearfully and wonderfully made. I'll tell you somebody else that didn't know about this. His name was Charles Darwin. Scientists have figured out that God's DNA code for you is 3 billion characters long. A character is like a single letter or number. And this DNA code is planted inside each cell of your body. Your body has 37.2 trillion cells. Your DNA code is so long that if the DNA from just one cell was taken out and it was stretched out, it would be 6 feet long, coming from one cell. And you know what we're about to do, right? What are we about to do? We're about to imagine that we could take the DNA, stretch it out of all 37.2 trillion cells. That would reach from here to the moon and back. Not one time, but 150,000 times. That's crazy. All right. How do you respond to a God, to the God, who is all-powerful, who is capable, one, of not just doing this stuff, like creating it out of nothing, that's impressive, or creating it just the words coming out of his mouth, right? But aren't you amazed at a God that can even think of this stuff? So what do we do in response? Well, number one, we better worship him, right? He deserves our worship. At the close of a psalm that exalts God's strength, David exclaims, "Be exalted, O Lord, in your strength. We will sing and praise your power." What about this from David? "I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works. My soul knows it very well." If your soul knows it very well, you can't help but worship the one who is the Almighty. What do you think about fearing the omnipotent one? Now, I realize we have our debates. Is this shaking in your boots kind of fear? Is this reverent fear, respect fear? And sometimes I want to answer that with a big oh yes. I mean, are there not instances of people in Scripture that they come face to face with some theophany of God and they just fall down and they're afraid? Well, are they just respecting him, or are they like afraid? And I know this is a complicated thing. I don't think that our default position is we're just walking around and we're just terrified of the Lord. I mean, the Bible will, tell us to fear him. And in the same passage it tells us to fear him, it'll also tell us to love him. But you gotta take this into account. Psalm 33 says, "By the word of the Lord the heavens were made." That's crazy power. Could you imagine right now if you had the power to just speak something into existence? Isn't that crazy power? And how many of you would be tempted to use that power selfishly rather than selflessly? I would be tempted, right? But God just speaks it into existence. Here's what the psalmist says: "Let all the earth fear the Lord. Let all the inhabitants of the world stand in awe of him. For he spoke and it came to be. He commanded and it stood firm." Y'all remember what Jesus said? "Do not fear those who can kill the body, cannot kill the soul. Rather fear him who can destroy both soul and body in hell." God, not Satan, is the only one who has that kind of power. And we should certainly revere and respect the one who has the power to bring the totality of a human being to ruin in hell. "Great and amazing are your deeds, O Lord God Almighty. Just and true are your ways, O King of the nations. Who will not fear, O Lord, and glorify your name? For you alone are holy." There's one of the places where Revelation uses the Almighty. But what does it say in connection with that? Fear him. What about this? Trust him. Because God can accomplish anything, he can always be trusted. Do you see how this ties into his promise making? Better yet, into his promise keeping? Right? When God says, "I promise that this is going to take place," we should trust him unconditionally, if only for the fact that there is no entity, there is no power, there is nothing that can thwart his purposes or undermine his promises. You remember what the omnipotent one said to Abraham? "Why did Sarah laugh and say, 'Shall I indeed bear a child now that I'm old?' Is anything too hard for the Lord? At the appointed time I will return to you about this time next year, and Sarah shall have a son." That's God asking the question, is there anything too hard for me? Can you think of anything that is too hard for me? And if you answer that, "No, there's nothing too hard for you, Lord," then you better trust him with everything inside of your body. Lastly, you gotta love him. Sometimes when we speak of power, and like we did tonight, we have things we're thinking about relative to power, like making stuff, creating stuff out of nothing, and all of that. Sometimes, and this is important to see, God's power can be kind of paradoxical. Let me explain. Sometimes great strength can be found in weakness. Is that a biblical principle? Sometimes power is displayed in restraint. It's not the kind of power we sometimes think about, but there's something in that. When Jesus saw Judas and he saw a band of Roman soldiers and he saw some temple police entering the Garden of Gethsemane, he could have called 12 legions of angels to rescue him, right? To put that into perspective, a Roman legion at full strength had about 6,000 soldiers. If one angel was powerful enough to eradicate an Assyrian army of 185,000 men in one night, my question is, what kind of power does 72,000 angels have? So, though Jesus had power, he had authority to prevent his arrest, to bring Judas's betrayal to naught, he didn't. And that was an exhibition of power in its own right. Y'all realize the kind of power it takes to restrain yourself, don't you? You ever felt that? Like, I so want to do this right now to this person. I want to. And then you got to find something to do what? To pull you back. Do we not say that the cross is the most powerful display of love we have ever seen? But the world looks at it, and all they see is weakness. Not to love the omnipotent one is disgraceful. When God finally shows up in a whirlwind, this is it, guys, I promise you. This is it. This is the end. I don't have another slide. I like this slide. When God finally shows up in the whirlwind to respond to Job's complaints, he peppers Job with 64 questions. And every one of those questions was designed to emphasize God's unfathomable power. Now, I've had some people I've talked to of the skeptical sort of right. They're like, hey, I've looked through some of those questions and I honestly could have answered some of them. We've learned some things. We're enlightened, I can talk to them about lightning and whatever. This is where I would like to say, okay, here's what I want to say to you, sir, right? If the God of heaven showed up in a whirlwind to you like he did to Job, I suspect that he would have picked out 64 questions that you couldn't answer. We are all in the same boat with Job. Every last one of us in here. We're all sitting in that boat with Job. Job is speechless. He can't answer even one of the questions. We are all small and powerless when compared to El Shaddai. But this is what you got to love, and this is my sort of message of hope and to some extent comfort. The one who spoke out of the whirlwind to Job is on our side. The one who made everything that we looked at tonight, when we looked up and when we looked around and when we looked down. The one who made all of that is on our side. the one who is able to do far more abundantly than all that we ask or all that we can even begin to imagine, is only a prayer away. And that reality should be a constant source of comfort and hope for us. I think one of our biggest challenges is to stop entertaining too small thoughts about God. It is so important that we work to think big thoughts about God. And this evening, you may be here, and you may not be a follower of Jesus. You might have a lot of questions about this God we've described tonight, and that is okay. There are people here that would love nothing more than to have a conversation with you and to guide you and to listen to you and respond to you. Maybe you're here tonight and you're ready to come forward with a heart full of faith, penitent of your sins, and you're willing to confess that Jesus is who he claimed to be, everything he claimed to be. And you're ready tonight, in fact, to be immersed in water, reenacting the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. Then we will accommodate you. And it may be you're here tonight and you're like, I got to be honest. I haven't been thinking as high of God as I should be. And it has had a dramatic effect on my life. And I need to get things right. Well, tonight's a good night to get it right. If we can help you in any way, come now together, we stand and sing.